Tonight's video dives into the most explosive turn yet, a quiet celebration shattered by a poisoned slice of cake, a pregnancy lost, and a household ripped open to reveal the nerves beneath its polished surface. We'll trace Naomi's collapse from kitchen light to hospital glare, follow Bill's spiral between guilt and fury as he realizes protection has a price, and watch Chelsea stitch together the crumbs of a crime until one name surfaces with chilling clarity: Hayley. But is this a lone act of malice or the fingertip of a larger machine? What happens when justice collides with leverage, when grief hardens into resolve, and when a single decision can detonate alliances years in the making? Settle in as we unpack motive, betrayal, and the kind of choices that stain every hand they touch. Naomi never had the chance to understand why the waves of dizziness came so quickly right after she swallowed the last bite of cake. The sweetness was still melting when a cold pinprick sensation ran down her spine, as if someone were tightening an invisible cord around her insides. The small celebration was supposed to be a moment to ease the exhaustion of the past weeks of pregnancy, to give Bill a chance to shrug off the weight of work and the knotted relationships around him, to stop Chelsea from seeing the whole house as a warehouse of secrets. The kitchen lights were bright, white porcelain plates lined the counter, the buttery smell mingled with vanilla still hung in the air, everything as peaceful as a fresh coat of paint over an old cracked wall, covering hairline fractures everyone chose to ignore. When Naomi clutched her belly and folded over the chair, her trembling fingers brushed the table's edge. Bill lunged by reflex, but his eyes, trained to observe and map risk in glacial negotiations, met only a blurry gap. He could not connect a harmless slice of cake to the horror ripping Naomi in two. The whole house turned into a long, endless corridor of fear, ragged breathing, footsteps, the call for an ambulance tangling into a thick rope of panic. In the hospital, unforgiving white light stripped away every disguise from every face. Naomi lay on the bed, head tilted, eyes opening and closing to clutch at any salvaged second of clarity, while Bill stood silent like a rock split by waves yet stubbornly upright. People say bodily pain can be measured, but the cost of a life denied before birth has no number large enough to contain it. When the doctor stepped out, there was no need for words, no nods or shakes, and Bill understood that what he had held tightly, those thin hopes he tended with small plans and self-promises to keep Naomi far from the storm of schemes churning outside, had fallen from his grasp. The loss did not roar, it seeped into him the way rain seeps into walls, and only when the frame is laid bare do you notice the house is rotted. Naomi would face long days with a body hollowed like desert after a flood, and Bill, who believed the world could be managed by discipline and calculus, for the first time found no equation left to solve. But the question refused to release him: where did the poison come from, who placed it in the cake, for what purpose, and why choose Naomi, or more precisely, the child inside her? That cake was not ownerless. It passed through many hands, many glances, many broken paths where at every bend stood someone seemingly harmless. Bill combed his memory. The box had arrived as a congratulations in advance after a tense meeting among people with colliding interests around trusts, addenda, dual signature clauses, tight smiles, and handshakes like gripping a blade. In that web, Chelsea was the first to refuse burial by night. She stood outside recovery, looked at Naomi sleeping in a tangle of 4 lines, then at Bill. The man cracking because he could not save what was most precious, the same man who used to think all attacks came from open adversaries. Chelsea understood this was not a frontline strike, it was an arrow loosed from a dark corner by someone close enough to know Naomi would eat, cruel enough to choose the exact moment, calm enough to erase traces. That calm carried the familiar scent of envy and threatened power. Chelsea began with crumbs: the delivery receipt, the building's security footage, the faint blur of a car idling for minutes at the curb, residue of chemicals on the cake knife, and a string of sub-30-second phone calls linked to newly added numbers and the contacts of a few nameless assistants. She knew each shard alone said nothing, but arranged together they would speak another language, the language the guilty always underestimate. And the more she pieced, the more one name surfaced like an ink stain blooming on wet paper: Hayley. Not because Hayley stood closest to the cake, not because she appeared at the gathering too perfectly put together, but because every escape route fed back to her in the most abrasive way: tiny transfers, last-minute schedule changes, an outdated bakery box no longer in production, and the faint bitter almond note that surfaced only when room temperature hit a precise threshold. Chelsea pictured the instant the cake touched Naomi's tongue, the ruthless mechanism engaging, and somewhere, Hayley restraining a smile she would never allow to show. But why Hayley? The answer lay not at the scene but deep in the soil where grudges braid like roots. Perhaps Hayley saw Naomi as an obstruction on a power board where Bill is the major piece she intends to control. perhaps a long grievance rekindled by a recent decision about a trust, a signature, an inheritance. Perhaps those old embers from an off-balance relationship Hayley refused to lose flared when Naomi became pregnant and turned everything into a powder keg. Chelsea did not need to define every motive to grasp one truth: the poisoning was carefully planned, cold and dry like a contract written in invisible ink. Meanwhile, Bill existed in a fog between guilt and fury. He interrogated himself about how he had left Naomi exposed among wolves, how blindly he had believed in friendly corridors and stock congratulations. Did he know Hayley was dangerous and still choose silence to preserve a brittle equilibrium among overlapping alliances? Did he pretend not to see obvious signs because he needed a temporary ally in a larger war? Each question drilled down, and he found himself on a cliff's edge where every choice led to collapse: keep quiet to preserve pending deals and accept disappearing as a coward in his own eyes, expose Hayley and trigger a war with no way back, where his secrets would be hauled out without mercy, or choose a sordid route: vengeance in the dark to maintain balance without showing his vulnerable roots. He thought of Naomi, the cold room, the hands once resting on her belly to catch a small, busy rhythm of heart. No justification could rescue him if he chose wrong again. Chelsea did not wait for his decision. She was accustomed to moving while others still weighed. The chain of proof she gathered was enough to form a path, not straight, but clear. A rear camera captured a woman in a cap, quick and small in her steps, wrapping the box in a dark tote, matching the window between the delivery truck's departure and the box's appearance. A cafe 2 blocks away processed a card payment tied to one of Hayley's supplementary cards exactly 3 minutes before the box turned up. An independent toxicologist, whom Chelsea quietly engaged through an old connection, confirmed traces of a banned compound often disguised within almond flavoring at ultra-low doses, subtle until the symptoms bloomed. The rest were throwaway interactions that mean nothing unless placed side by side. A nameless text, a borrowed car, a missed call, a photo of latex gloves tossed in a bin near the parking lot. Chelsea knew some would call her imaginative, accuse her of casting too wide a net to catch a single fish, but sometimes the overlap of countless small details is not coincidence, it is a criminal's fingerprint. In her mind, the picture came together with a chilling closure. The moment truth surfaced did not arrive with screams or the din of a crowded room. It slid in as quietly as ripples on a lake. Chelsea set the file down and looked into Hayley's eyes, which had run out of hiding places, and then at Bill, a man yanked onto the fault line between loyalty, humiliation, and rightful rage. No words were spoken, yet everything was said. Bill's hatred was not a tempest, it was a steadily rising tide, drowning what remained of once good memories. He replayed the recent days, the shoulder touches too well timed, the friendly invitations to meetings that were always followed by rumors, the warped smiles like lines etched into glass. He recognized how far into a maze of compromises he had traveled to lose his instinct. And then the question bit back: what would he do with this truth? File it with authorities he did not believe to be clean? Publicize it and accept an earthquake whose path he could not control? Or select a shadowy option, strike back in kind to hold the balance while keeping his weak roots covered? Every route demanded some piece of his soul as payment. Naomi woke into an ash-gray afternoon, the smell of antiseptic threaded with rain slipping through the window seam. The emptiness in her body turned every sound into a foreign echo. Her pain did not scream, it lay still and heavy, making the smallest movement feel like a nightmare. She remembered the cake, the naive trust in kindness, and the ripples of suspicion she had waved away because she refused to turn her world into a scaffold. She did not know that outside, Chelsea had finished mapping the storm to come, and Bill was beached between honesty and survival. She did not yet know the name of the hand that set poison into her life, but she could feel a change begin. From victim she was sitting up, slowly, but with steel, and deep within, the need for justice was hardening into a new, unsparing will to defend herself. Naomi no longer wanted shelter, she wanted the hands that pushed her over the brink to stand exposed in the same light under which she had lain open on the operating table. Meanwhile, Hayley took the final calculated steps on the board she believed she had locked from every angle. She had trusted in the cleanliness of her trail, in the likelihood that people would be too engrossed in their own pain to notice the fine threads she pulled. She forgot that some people like Chelsea are born to read the blank spaces between lines, to touch the shadowed part of an event and find in it the culprit's portrait. When she sensed the net tightening, Hayley did not panic, she sharpened. She began to raise a new defense, sow doubts about the compound's origin, activate old debts to steer testimony, even prepare to throw a substitute into the tiger's mouth, someone who took cash at the right time, someone with a sticky past easy to indict. She believed that truth, without a guide stubborn enough, disintegrates in noise, and once Bill hesitated, once Naomi fatigued, once Chelsea became isolated, order would reset, the kind she could manipulate from backstage. But not everything lay within her control. A scrap of glove, a dead-angle camera the new guard had just installed, a refund delayed that exposed a chain of transactions, an assistant assumed loyal but newly insulted into leaking texts. The smallest cracks are what break a dam. Chelsea handed the file to Bill like a last life ring to a drowning man, but this ring was also a stone at his ankle. He had to choose a direction to swim. Helplessness turned into a strange fire in his chest, wanting to burn everything down and at the same time to freeze to preserve what was left. He remembered Naomi, the way she had looked at him with a simple trust that seemed unbreakable. He understood that if he chose silence to keep his networks intact, he would not have the courage to stand beside her. If he chose a public reckoning, he would rip open the veil that had long shielded his other calculations, the very things that made him vulnerable to waiting rivals. And if he selected covert revenge, he would cross a line another day, by another hand, could just as easily be used to kill him. In the snarl, Chelsea did not press. She only placed an unspoken question in the room: can justice share a field with interest, or must one be sacrificed? When he finally lifted his gaze, he knew any choice might cost him allies, status, and self-respect, but none would return the child already lost. The only salvageable thing, then, was the meaning of the pain. Would it lead to truth in the open, or be buried beneath a new agreement? From that instant the gears spun faster. Chelsea distributed the evidence 3 ways to prevent suffocation at a single checkpoint, stamped it with time, and spread the risk. 1 packet went to the steadiest authority she could find, another to a journalist who still maintained a moral boundary, and 1 was locked in a safe set to open automatically only if either she or Bill disappeared. Through a sleepless night Bill sorted his commitments, prepared for what would collapse if the storm hit, even listed those who needed protection for standing too near the fire by accident. When Naomi learned the name of the person who had aimed the knife at her, a hard calm rose within her. She would not let herself be defined by loss, would not let others write the next chapters of the child who was gone, turning it into a bargaining chip on the board. Sensing movement, Hayley called in debtors, made promises, issued threats, and blew smoke to distract. All of it unfolded at once, a tightrope dance where a single misstep meant the void. But the story cannot end with a clean, straight exposure. When Chelsea pulls the curtain, who stands behind it? Hayley alone, or a long-standing framework that uses people like her as its hands? If Bill steps forward, how many other secrets get blown open, how many alliances spin and bite, how many hidden knives inside handshakes flash all at once? Is Naomi ready to meet the face of the truth when it carries pieces she never wanted to know about the man standing at her bedside? And if the evidence, sharp as it is, gets bent by someone before it reaches where it must, is Chelsea prepared to step deeper into the gray, where justice isn't only files and protocol but the stamina of a conscience willing to pay? Each question opens another branching path, and each path leads to a new, unnamed conflict. Perhaps the war won't end with the bang of a gavel but with a chain reaction that drives everyone to a wall. Perhaps Hayley has not played all her cards, perhaps another hand placed the cake near Naomi to force the stain onto Hayley. Perhaps Bill's own old mistakes are the mud that will hold his ankles when he tries to haul Naomi to shore. One thing, however, is no longer conjecture: rage now has a target, pain has a direction, and silence is no longer an option when every heart in this story has been forced to face its darkest part. The days ahead will test both will and truth, 2 things that rarely win the same game, and at the end, each person will have to answer the only question that matters: to protect what remains, how much more will they ruin? And will that price buy any peace at all, or merely another coat of paint on a wall still waiting to drink in the rain? In the end, nothing felt resolved, only rearranged. The kitchen where it started sat in quiet disorder, a cutting board without a knife, a cake stand without a cake, a room that had learned the weight of absence. Naomi moved through the house like someone relearning gravity, slower, steadier, no longer asking for a softer world but measuring the one she had. Bill stood at the threshold between confession and strategy, cataloging the cost of each path, knowing some prices are paid in reputation and others in sleep. Chelsea filed her copies and locked her safe, not out of paranoia but out of respect for the way power behaves when cornered. Somewhere across town, Hayley rehearsed new versions of the narrative, tightening seams, priming substitutes, counting the people who owed her, never admitting even to herself how thin the ice had become beneath those polished shoes. The city carried on as if a life had not been pushed off its hinge, traffic hummed, meetings convened, the facade of normalcy sealed cracks with fast-drying cement. But the people at the center had crossed into a terrain where every gesture could be evidence and every kindness might be bait. Naomi's grief folded into discipline, appointments kept, names noted, timelines fixed in ink. Bill began to dismantle a few quiet arrangements that once made him feel untouchable, each cut a small revolt against the man he had been the night the cake arrived. Chelsea reached out to the two sources most likely to bend and found neither would. It was a rare mercy, or the calm before a more complicated storm. What happens next will depend less on who screams the loudest and more on who endures the longest. If the file reaches the right desk, will it be read or traded? If one witness blinks, how many truths dissolve with them? And when the final tally is taken, will the person who poisoned the cake be the only one held to account, or will the system that taught her how to disappear in daylight finally have its reflection forced against the glass? The night closed without answers, only a set of choices laid out like pieces on a board no longer interested in fairness, and somewhere inside that silence, resolve hardened into a blade.